It was a clear, crisp morning on Station Ilara, a human outpost orbiting a distant planet on the edge of the galaxy. The station, built with advanced technology, had been home to countless humans for the last several years. But today, something different was coming. The quiet hum of the station's engines was drowned out by the noise of footsteps echoing through the metal halls. The Carathan delegation had arrived. The Carathans were a race of towering 8-foot-tall beings with thick, plated armor covering their bodies. Their eyes glowed a deep, almost fiery red, a symbol of their strength and pride. They were a warrior race, respected and feared across the galaxy. Their people had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, and their leaders commanded the kind of loyalty and authority that most humans couldn't even begin to understand. The humans aboard Station Ilara were nervous. Some spoke of the Carathans with awe, others with fear. But one thing was certain: nobody wanted to be the first to make a mistake. Among the humans was Sergeant Daniel Reeve. He wasn't the most decorated soldier, nor the loudest, but his reputation was strong. He had faced many challenges in his life, and not all of them were on the battlefield. Daniel was different from most of his fellow soldiers. He didn't fear the unknown. In fact, he was driven by curiosity and a desire to understand things others might run from. That's why, when the Carathan delegation arrived, Daniel didn't hide. He stepped forward, ready to see for himself what these legendary warriors were truly like. Standing in the crowded docking bay, Daniel couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. He had trained for years in combat, in strategy, and in diplomacy, but facing beings like the Carathans was something else entirely. They were known for their mental strength as much as their physical power. Rumors said that they could form a psychic bond with those they respected, connecting their minds in ways humans could barely imagine. But few humans ever had the chance to experience this connection. As the doors to the docking bay opened, the Carathan delegation stepped out. They moved with purpose, their massive forms casting long shadows on the floor. Their leader, General Varnock, was the tallest of them all. His armor was a deep, polished silver, adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to shift with every movement he made. His eyes locked onto Daniel's for a brief moment, a silent challenge in his gaze. The room went silent. All eyes were on the Carathans. Even the most experienced soldiers on Station Ilara seemed to shrink back in their presence. Daniel didn't look away. He met Varnock's gaze head-on, feeling the weight of the unspoken words between them. The moment stretched longer than it should have, but Daniel held firm. "Welcome to Station Ilara," said Commander Laura Hansen, stepping forward with a practiced smile. She extended a hand toward General Varnock. "We're honored to have you here." Varnock's eyes flicked down to her hand, and after a moment of hesitation, he clasped it with one of his own massive armored ones. His grip was firm but not threatening. "Your welcome is appreciated," Varnock said in a deep voice that resonated in the air. His words were deliberate, each one carrying the weight of an ancient culture. Behind him, the other Carathan soldiers remained still, their faces expressionless, yet there was an energy about them, an aura of quiet power. No one dared approach them too closely. "Why did you come here?" Daniel found himself asking, his voice calm but inquisitive. Varnock turned his gaze toward him again, studying him as though reading something deeper than just the surface. "We came for more than just a meeting, human. The galaxy is changing. There are forces rising that you do not yet understand. Your kind may not be ready for it, but we must form alliances. There is power in unity." Daniel listened closely. It was clear that Varnock wasn't just talking about joining forces to fight an enemy. There was something deeper in his words, something that hinted at a much larger picture. He nodded, but before he could respond, Varnock spoke again. "You do not fear us, do you, human?" Varnock's question wasn't a challenge, but rather a simple observation. Daniel paused. It wasn't that he was brave. In fact, he felt a twinge of fear, but it was a different kind of fear, the kind that made him want to understand, not run away. He had always been curious about the unknown. "No," Daniel answered honestly, "I think fear clouds judgment. I'm here to learn, not to fight." Varnak's gaze softened, though only slightly, a rare trait among your kind. He turned his attention back to the rest of the station's officers. "We will begin our discussions shortly. But know this, humans, you will have to earn our trust. We do not give it freely." As Varnak and his soldiers moved deeper into the station, Daniel found himself unable to look away. There was something about the Carathan leader that intrigued him, something about the way Varnak carried himself. It wasn't arrogance, it was certainty, confidence tempered by years of struggle and loss. But it was more than that. There was a deeper connection that Daniel couldn't explain, a feeling. As the Carathan soldiers disappeared into the shadows of the station, Daniel stood still for a moment longer. He didn't know why, but something in him whispered that his life was about to change forever. And soon, he would come to realize that this first encounter would be just the beginning of something far greater. The days after the Carathan delegation arrived were filled with tension. Humans and Carathans went through the motions of cooperation, but there was an unspoken barrier between them. The Carathans were not quick to trust, and the humans, though fascinated by the alien race, were unsure of how to connect with them. Daniel Reeves spent his days watching the Carathans from afar. He was assigned to oversee some of the training exercises, helping integrate Carathan soldiers with human teams. The soldiers from both sides trained in silence, rarely speaking to each other. But there was something about the Carathan way of fighting that Daniel couldn't ignore. It was raw, precise, and filled with an energy that seemed almost otherworldly. They moved like one, each soldier anticipating the next move of their ally without words. Yet, even as the Carathan warriors displayed their skills, there was one thing Daniel couldn't stop thinking about: the bond. The Carathans spoke of it in whispers. To bond was to link minds, to see into the depths of each other's thoughts and memories. It was a rare and powerful connection that only the strongest could share. The idea of it was terrifying yet fascinating. Daniel had read about it, but there were few humans who had ever experienced such a thing. And then, one evening, General Varnak made an announcement that no one was expecting. The meeting was held in the station's main conference room. The air was thick with uncertainty as the human leaders sat with their Carathan counterparts. The station's commanding officer, Commander Laura Henson, was present, along with several of the senior officers. Varnak stood at the head of the table, his towering figure casting a long shadow over the room. His expression was serious, his eyes scanning the humans present as though weighing them. "I have a challenge," Varnak said in his deep, resonating voice. "It is not one of strength, but of mind." The room grew still. Daniel, sitting near the back, felt his heartbeat quicken. He knew what was coming. Everyone did. The Carathans had always been secretive about their bonding rituals. The idea that Varnak might challenge someone to undergo the bond with him was rare, even among their own kind. "We Carathans do not give our trust lightly," Varnak continued. "To earn it is a test of your mind, your soul. You must prove that you are worthy of the deepest connection." He turned his gaze to the room, his eyes briefly landing on Daniel. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. No one spoke, but it was clear. Varnak was waiting for someone to step forward. Daniel knew this was his chance. He had thought about it in the past days, about the bond, about what it could mean for both his people and the Carathans. But the fear still lingered. Was he ready? Could he handle it? Before he could stop himself, he rose from his seat. The room was silent as he stepped forward, his boots echoing on the metal floor. All eyes were on him. And for the first time, Daniel felt the weight of his decision. Varnak's gaze locked onto Daniel's, and Daniel felt a strange pull. There was something in Varnak's eyes. A challenge, but also something more. Varnak was waiting for him to falter, waiting to see if he would turn away. "I will do it," Daniel said, his voice steady, though his heart raced in his chest. There was a long pause, and then Varnak nodded. "Very well. You have chosen the path of the bond. Prepare yourself." Daniel nodded, his mind racing. He had no idea what to expect, but he couldn't back down now. The Carathan warriors, who had been silent up to this point, began to whisper among themselves. The bond was a serious matter, something that few ever had the courage to undertake. Most people, even within the Carathan race, had only shared the bond with their closest allies. For a human to even consider such a thing was unheard of. The room was arranged for the ceremony, a quiet space in the station's meditation chamber, where light streamed through small windows, casting soft shadows on the walls. Varnock stood at the center, his tall form illuminated by the gentle glow of the station's lights. He was no longer the intimidating giant. Now, he seemed almost human. There was a quiet dignity about him. And in that moment, Daniel could see that this wasn't just about strength or honor. It was about understanding, a true connection. "You must be ready," Varnock said, his voice low. "This bond is not to be taken lightly. You will see parts of me, and I will see parts of you. If you falter, the bond may break, and you will lose yourself." Daniel nodded. "I understand." Varnock closed his eyes, and the room grew even quieter. The air seemed to thrum with energy, and Daniel felt a cold chill run down his spine. He wasn't sure what was about to happen, but he had come too far to turn back. He focused his thoughts, trying to center himself. As he did, a strange warmth spread across his chest, as if something inside him was awakening. Varnock raised his arms, and a soft hum filled the room, the energy between them beginning to swirl and grow stronger. Daniel's mind began to slip away from his body. He felt his thoughts stretch out, like tendrils of light reaching into the unknown. Then suddenly, he was no longer alone. He was in Varnock's mind. It wasn't like anything Daniel had ever imagined. There were no walls, no barriers, just an endless expanse of thoughts, memories, and emotions swirling around him. He could see Varnock's past, feel the pain and loss the Carathan general had endured. And then something unexpected happened. Daniel's own memories began to surface, memories he had buried long ago. The loss of his family, the weight of his responsibilities, his fear of never being good enough. The connection between them was deep, overwhelming, and raw. Daniel struggled to keep his mind clear, but Varnock's presence was strong, a constant force in his thoughts. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the connection pulled back, leaving Daniel gasping for air. He blinked, the world around him coming back into focus. Varnock stood in front of him, his eyes wide, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Varnock's voice broke the silence. "You are stronger than I thought, human. You did not falter." Daniel didn't know how to respond. His heart was still pounding in his chest, his mind reeling from the experience. But somehow, he knew that something had changed between him and Varnock, and between their peoples. The bond had been forged. The days after the bond ceremony felt like a dream to Daniel. He had felt the weight of Varnock's mind, shared his memories, his pain, and his pride. The bond was stronger than anything he could have imagined, and it was not something that could be easily forgotten. It had changed him, made him see the world from a different perspective. But more than that, it had brought him closer to the Carathans, to Varnock, in a way he could not explain. But the reality of the situation quickly set in. The station was still on high alert. The Carathans' presence on Station Ilara was not without its challenges. There were whispers among the human soldiers, murmurs of discomfort about the bond Daniel had shared with Varnock. Many were unsure of what it meant, and some were even afraid. The trust between the humans and the Carathans was fragile, and everyone knew it. Tensions had been building ever since the Carathan delegation had arrived, and even though Daniel had earned some respect for his bravery, there were still many who saw him as a curiosity, not a leader. One afternoon, as Daniel walked through the station's hallways, he found himself deep in thought, his mind still caught in the whirl of his shared connection with Varnock. He had never expected such an experience, and he still wasn't sure what it all meant for the future. But one thing was certain. The Carathans had shown him a side of the universe he had never seen before. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Turning, he saw Varnock walking toward him, his massive form filling the hallway. Unlike before, Varnock's presence no longer felt intimidating. Now it felt familiar, almost comforting. "Daniel," Varnock said, his deep voice steady, but filled with an undercurrent of something else. "There are matters to discuss." Daniel nodded and fell into step beside the Carathan leader. They walked together in silence for a moment, before Varnock spoke again. "The humans do not fully trust us," Varnock said, his voice low, almost thoughtful. "And I understand why. We are not an easy people to understand." Daniel paused. He could feel Varnock's thoughts, still connected from the bond, and he knew the general was struggling with the same issue. "I know," Daniel replied. "I've seen it. Some of the soldiers, they're scared. They don't know what to make of the Carathans, or me. You know how it is." Varnock turned his head slightly, his red eyes meeting Daniel's. "Fear is a powerful thing. It can either hold you back or make you stronger. But it is something we must face, together." Daniel thought about that for a moment. He had never truly thought of fear in that way. He had always been afraid of things, but he had never let it control them. But the fear between the Carathans and humans, it was different. It wasn't something that could be overcome quickly. "I think we need to show them that we can work together," Daniel said after a moment. "Not just as soldiers, but as people. They need to see that the bond between you and me is real." Varnock nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Yes, and the time for words is ending. It is time for action." As they reached the training room, Daniel could see the soldiers, both human and Carathan, lining up for the next exercise. This was the moment that would test their new alliance. The mission was simple, a mock battle where both groups would have to work together to overcome obstacles. But as the soldiers began to take their positions, Daniel noticed something strange. The Carathan warriors were moving with precision and confidence, while the humans seemed hesitant, unsure of how to approach their new partners. It was clear that even though the bond between Daniel and Varnock had been formed, there was still a long road ahead. "Let's begin," Varnock said, stepping onto the field. His tone was firm, commanding, yet there was an almost imperceptible hint of trust in it. Daniel took his place alongside the Carathan soldiers, trying his best to remain calm. He knew this was more than just a training exercise. This was a chance to prove that the bond between humans and Carathans could work. That trust could be built, even in the face of fear. The exercise started, and almost immediately, the differences between the two groups became clear. The Carathans moved as a single unit, their actions coordinated, smooth, and powerful. They seemed to read each other's movements without speaking, anticipating what the others would do next. Meanwhile, the humans struggled to keep up, their movements more erratic, unsure. Daniel observed it all, feeling the weight of the challenge ahead. But he wasn't going to let his people fail. Not after everything they had been through. He could feel Varnock's presence in his mind, like a steady hand guiding him. "Form ranks," Daniel shouted to the human soldiers. "Focus and work together." He quickly relayed orders to the Carathan soldiers, and to his surprise, Varnock nodded and repeated the command in his native tongue, his voice booming across the field. The Carathans responded immediately, and for the first time, Daniel saw the two groups working as one. The humans followed the lead of the Carathans, and the Carathans adapted to the human strengths. The battle grew intense as they faced obstacles, but slowly the humans and Carathans began to cooperate. They moved together, covering each other's weaknesses, learning from each other. Daniel could feel the trust building, not just between him and Varnock, but between all the soldiers. It was a slow process, but it was happening. Finally, the exercise ended, and both groups stood together, panting, tired, but victorious. Daniel looked around at the faces of the soldiers, both human and Carathan. For the first time, he saw something new in their eyes: respect. Varnock approached Daniel, his face showing a rare expression of approval. "You were right, human," he said. "Fear can hold us back, but trust can move us forward." Daniel smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. This was just the beginning. They had passed their first test together. As the days passed after the successful training exercise, Station Ilara began to feel a sense of calm that hadn't existed before. The humans and Carathans were learning to work together, slowly but surely. The bond between and Daniel and Varnock had paved the way for understanding, and though it was still fragile, trust was beginning to grow. However, not everyone on Station Ilara was convinced that the Carathans were truly allies. There were whispers in the hallways, concerns about the Carathans' true intentions. The humans, despite their training and the shared experiences with the Carathans, couldn't fully shake the doubts that had been planted in their minds. Could the Carathans be trusted, or were they merely biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike? Daniel could feel the tension, even if no one said it aloud. He had heard the rumors, the doubts, and the quiet conversations behind closed doors. But he also knew something that many of his fellow soldiers didn't. He had felt the bond. He had connected with Varnock on a level that no one else had. And despite all the fear and uncertainty, Daniel believed in the Carathan general. But Daniel's faith was about to be tested in ways he never expected. One evening, as he sat in his quarters, reading through some reports, he was interrupted by an urgent message on his communicator. The message was short, but its meaning was clear: unidentified object approaching Station Ilara. Immediate action required. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. An unknown ship was coming toward the station, and it wasn't a friendly visitor. He immediately stood up, grabbing his gear and rushing out of his room. He had no idea who this new enemy was, but his mind raced with possibilities. Could it be another alien race? Or was this some kind of test? A challenge to see how far the Carathans would go to protect the humans. When Daniel arrived at the command center, the room was already buzzing with activity. Commander Laura Henson was on the screen, speaking to the officers in charge of the station's security. "Sergeant Reeve," Commander Henson said as Daniel entered, "I need you on the front lines. We don't know what we're dealing with yet, but we have to be prepared. Get your team ready." Daniel nodded. His heart was pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment where everything would be put to the test. His trust in the Carathans, the bond he had formed with Varnock, and the growing unity between the humans and Carathans. All of it would have to come together now. "I'm on it," Daniel replied, turning to leave. Just as he was about to exit the command center, Varnock's voice echoed through the room. "Daniel Reeve." Turning, Daniel found the towering Carathan general standing in the doorway. Varnock's face was serious, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a rare urgency. "The threat is real," Varnock said, his deep voice steady. "I will stand with you, human. Together, we will face whatever comes." Daniel nodded, feeling a sense of reassurance in the Carathan general's words. "I know. We'll face it together." Without another word, they left the command center and made their way to the docking bay, where the Carathan soldiers were already assembling, preparing for whatever danger awaited them. The humans, too, were gearing up, putting on their armor and loading their weapons. But despite the fear that gripped everyone, there was something different this time. There was unity. The bond between the two races was no longer just an idea or a dream. It was real, and it was their strength. As they reached the docking bay, Daniel saw the incoming ship on the large monitor. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its sleek, dark shape was almost like a shadow in space, its design alien to everything the humans had encountered before. The ship moved with an unsettling grace, closing in on Station Ilara at a rapid speed. "This is it," Daniel said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "We need to make sure we're ready. Varnock, are your soldiers prepared?" Varnock's red eyes glowed with a steady confidence. We are ready. We will fight, and we will protect. The rest of the Carathan soldiers stood in a tight formation, their armor gleaming under the station's lights. They were a formidable force, and Daniel felt the weight of their presence beside him. They might not have been fully trusted by everyone yet, but they were fighting for the same cause. The station's alarms blared, signaling the imminent arrival of the unknown vessel. The human soldiers and Carathan warriors took their positions, their weapons ready. Daniel could feel the tension in the air, the quiet before the storm. They had no idea who or what they were facing, but they would face it together. The ship was now close enough to be clearly visible on the station's sensors. It was large, too large to be a single fighter or reconnaissance ship. The shape of it resembled a massive triangular structure with sharp edges, and its surface shimmered as though it was made of a material unlike anything found in human or Carathan technology. As it docked, the station's airlocks engaged. The hum of machinery filled the room, and Daniel's heart raced in his chest. This was the moment of truth. Whoever, or whatever, was on the other side of that airlock, they would have to fight. The doors to the docking bay opened, and in stepped 3 humanoid figures, all cloaked in dark armor. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, their presence both intimidating and alien. Daniel instinctively reached for his weapon, but Varnak's voice stopped him. "Stay calm, human," Varnak said softly. "I can sense them. They are not our enemies." Yet, Daniel's eyes narrowed. The tension in the air was thick, and the unknown being stood silently, as though waiting for something. The leader of the 3 stepped forward, removing their helmet. What was revealed was a face unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. The creature had smooth gray skin, with glowing yellow eyes that seemed to pierce through him. "You are the humans and Carathans," the alien spoke in a voice that was both soft and powerful. "We have come to offer a warning." Daniel stepped forward cautiously. "A warning? Who are you?" The alien's eyes shifted to Varnak, and then back to Daniel. "We are the Cyril, and we are not your enemies. But something far darker is coming for both your people. You must prepare." The words echoed in Daniel's mind, like a distant drumbeat that grew louder with every passing second. Cyril. The name felt strange, unfamiliar, yet there was something in the way the alien had spoken that carried a sense of weight. It was a warning, but what kind of warning? What threat could be so great that the Cyril, who were clearly not enemies, felt the need to approach Station Ilara? The alien's glowing yellow eyes studied Daniel carefully. There was no malice in the gaze, but there was an urgency, a desperation that was hard to ignore. "We have no time," the Cyril leader said, his voice low and steady. "The Zarvok are coming." The name struck like lightning. Daniel could feel Varnak's presence in his mind, the bond between them pulsing with a shared sense of dread. Zarvok. It was a name Daniel had heard only in passing, whispered in the darker corners of military discussions. The Zarvok were a race of conquerors, known across the galaxy for their merciless campaigns. They had swept through entire star systems, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. Daniel took a step forward, his mind racing. Who are the Zarvok? Why are they coming here? The Cyril leader's eyes flickered with sorrow. The Zarvok are a force of destruction. They do not negotiate. They do not reason. They take what they want by force, and they are coming for your resources, your technology, your worlds. The alien paused for a moment, as if weighing his next words carefully. Your people, the humans, are not the only ones in danger. The Carathan race is also their target. And the moment they discover that the 2 of your species have united, they will stop at nothing to destroy you both. Daniel felt the weight of the words sink in. The danger was real. This wasn't just about protecting a station or winning a battle. The Zarvok would come for everything. Their way of life, their homes, and their people. The Carathans and humans were both vulnerable, and together, they would be the Zarvok's first target. Varnak, standing next to Daniel, clenched his fists. The Carathan general's usual calm demeanor had been replaced with a fierce intensity. Daniel could feel the anger radiating off him. The Zarvok were not a race to take lightly. Varnak knew all too well the destruction they left in their wake. "We cannot let this happen," Varnak said, his voice filled with resolve. "We must prepare." The Seral leader nodded solemnly. "I have seen the future. If you are not ready, if you do not unite your forces fully, the Zarvok will wipe you out. It will be an end to your species, both human and Carathan." Daniel swallowed hard. The situation was grave. The threat of the Zarvok loomed like a dark cloud hanging over everything. But there was one thing that stood out to him in the Seral's words. "You've seen the future," he asked. "How do you know all of this?" The Seral leader's glowing yellow eyes met his. "The Seral are observers, not warriors. We do not interfere in the events of other races, but we see the paths that unfold. I have watched many civilizations rise and fall. The Zarvok have destroyed every race that resisted them. But there is a chance, a slim chance, that you may survive, if you stand together." Daniel felt his heart race. This wasn't just a warning. It was a call to action. The Carathan and human forces would need to come together like never before, combining their strengths, knowledge, and resolve. If they couldn't unite in the face of this threat, they wouldn't survive. He turned to Varnak, whose eyes were now locked on the Seral leader. The bond between them pulsed again, stronger than ever. Daniel could feel Varnak's determination. The Carathan general wasn't just going to sit back and wait for the Zarvok to arrive. He would fight, and Daniel would fight beside him. "We will prepare," Daniel said, his voice steady, filled with purpose. "We won't let the Zarvok destroy us." Varnak nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Together, we are strong." The Seral leader stepped back, his posture still as rigid as ever. "I will give you the knowledge you need to stand against the Zarvok. It is a risk, but it is your only chance." Daniel nodded. "Tell us what we need to do." The Seral reached into his cloak and produced a small glowing device. It was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. It pulsed with a soft light, and as the alien handed it to Daniel, he could feel the weight of it in his hand. It was both ancient and powerful. "This device contains the key to defeating the Zarvok," the Seral explained. "It is a weapon, one that will neutralize the Zarvok's greatest strength, but it requires both human and Carathan cooperation to activate. You must trust each other completely to use it." Daniel's eyes widened. The device was not just a weapon. It was a symbol of everything they had fought for. The trust between humans and Carathans was fragile, but if they could come together in this moment, they might just stand a chance against the Zarvok. "This is our chance," Daniel said, holding the device up. "We need to make it count." Varnak stepped forward, his voice deep and firm. "We will unite our forces. We will not fail." As the Seral leader turned to leave, he looked at Daniel one last time. "Remember, this is not just about fighting. It is about understanding. If you do not trust each other fully, if you let fear tear you apart, the Zarvok will win. Choose your path wisely." With that, the Seral and his companions left, disappearing into the shadows of the station. The weight of their words hung in the air like a cloud, thick and heavy. Daniel stood in silence for a moment, his thoughts racing. He knew the task ahead would be difficult, perhaps the hardest thing he and the Carathans would ever face. But there was no turning back now. The Zarvok were coming, and Station Ilara would be ready. Daniel turned to Varnak, who was already preparing for the coming battle. His mind was set. He knew that this was their moment. Together, they could face whatever challenge the universe threw at them. The battle was not just for survival anymore. It was for their future, and it was time to take a stand. The next few days on Station Ilara were filled with intense preparation. The threat of the Zarvok hung over everything like a storm cloud, and the pressure to prepare was palpable. Daniel could feel it in every conversation, in every glance exchanged between the humans and Carathan soldiers. The time for training and diplomacy had passed. Now it was time to fight. Daniel stood in the station's command center, watching as the final preparations were being made. The human and Carathan forces had united, each group sharing what they knew, what they had learned. The Carathans brought their immense strength, their advanced technology, and their battle experience. The humans offered their creativity, adaptability, and tactical ingenuity. Together, they made a formidable team. But despite all the preparation, Daniel knew something essential was still missing. The bond, the connection. It wasn't just about weapons or strategy. They needed trust, not just between the humans and Carathans, but between the soldiers themselves. They needed to believe that they could rely on each other in the heat of battle, that when the time came, they would fight side by side, not as two different species, but as a united force. Varnock entered the room, his presence as commanding as ever. Daniel turned to him, sensing the same quiet intensity in the Carathan general. Varnock was ready. He had been ready for this moment long before the Zarvok had even been mentioned. "Daniel," Varnock said, his deep voice steady. "The preparations are nearly complete. We have done all we can. Now, we wait." Daniel nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more they needed. "It's hard to believe this is happening," Daniel said. "A few days ago, everything felt normal. Now, we're facing a war." Varnock gave a rare, small smile. "War is never normal, but it is inevitable. We have fought for our survival many times, and now it is your turn." Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he stared out the command center's windows, looking at the stars beyond. Space was vast, beautiful, and unforgiving. He couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. They weren't just fighting for Station Ilara. They were fighting for their homes, for their people, and for the future of their species. "You know," Daniel said after a long pause, "I never imagined that this would be my life. A year ago, I was just a soldier doing my job. Now, I'm part of something much bigger than I could have ever imagined." Varnock's eyes softened slightly. "You are more than a soldier now, Daniel Reeve. You are a leader. Your bond with us, with me, has made you something greater. You have proven yourself in ways few ever do. But now you must prove it again, to yourself, to your people, and to the Carathans." Daniel turned to Varnock, feeling the weight of his words. It wasn't just the Carathan soldiers who were depending on him now. It was the entire station, the human crew. They were all counting on him to lead them, to unite them in the face of a threat they had never imagined. He felt the pressure, but there was also something else. Resolve. The determination to protect those he cared about, to prove that humans could stand tall, even against the most powerful enemies. "Let's make sure they know who we are," Daniel said, his voice firm with purpose. "The Zarvok may have underestimated us, but they won't again. Together, we'll show them what humanity and the Carathans can do when they stand united." Varnock's eyes gleamed with pride. "Yes, together, we will make them see." As the two of them turned to leave the command center, Daniel couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. It wasn't just hope for victory. It was hope for something greater, the possibility that humans and Carathans could truly be allies, that they could trust each other, not just in battle, but in life. Hours passed as the soldiers prepared for the battle to come. The human crew worked tirelessly, double-checking their weapons and systems, while the Carathan soldiers honed their battle strategies. The bond between them had been tested in small ways, but now it was time for the real test. Outside the station, the stars remained silent, unaware of the tension building within Station Ilara. The Zarvok were still out there, and they were coming. The ship that had arrived days before now drifted silently in space, its ominous presence a reminder of the approaching storm. Daniel stood in the observation deck, his eyes scanning the dark expanse of space. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one thing was clear. There was no turning back. The fate of Station Ilara, of their people, depended on the choices they made in the coming hours. Varnock approached him, standing beside him at the large window. "The battle will come soon," Varnock said, his voice calm, but there was an edge to it that Daniel couldn't ignore. Daniel nodded. "I know, and we'll be ready." "You must lead them," Varnock said, "not just in battle, but in spirit. The soldiers look to you now." Daniel turned to face the Carathan general. "I know," he said quietly, "but I'm not doing this alone. I've got you and your soldiers. And the humans are ready, too." Varnock's red eyes glowed in the dim light of the station. "I will stand with you, Daniel Reeve. We will fight together." Daniel smiled. It wasn't a smile of victory, but one of understanding. The bond between him and Varnock had come to mean more than just their shared connection. It was a promise, a shared commitment to fight for what was right, to protect those they loved, and to show the universe that they could be more than just their differences. Together, they would face the Zarvok. Together, they would prove that humanity and the Carathans were stronger united than divided. And together, they would win. The station was alive with activity as the countdown began. The warning from the Cyril had left a lasting impression on everyone aboard Station Ilara. They knew the Zarvok were coming, and they knew that this would be a fight for survival. Time was running out, and preparations were in full swing. Daniel walked through the halls of the station, his mind focused. He could hear the hum of machinery, the clatter of soldiers getting ready for what was about to come. The human and Carathan forces were working side by side, training and equipping themselves for the battle ahead. But despite all the preparation, there was still a weight in the air, an unease that everyone felt, but no one dared to voice. The Cyril had given them hope, but that hope came with a heavy price. The device they had provided, the one that was supposed to give them a chance against the Zarvok, required more than just technology and strength. It required complete trust between humans and Carathans. If they failed to fully unite, the weapon wouldn't work. Daniel's heart raced as he made his way to the command center. There, standing at the front, was Varnock, the Carathan general, his eyes sharp and unwavering. Despite the weight of the situation, there was something calm about him, something that Daniel admired. Varnock had always been a pillar of strength, but now more than ever, his resolve was clear. "We are ready," Varnock said as Daniel approached. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it that couldn't be ignored. Daniel nodded. "We've come this far, Varnock. There's no turning back now." Varnock turned to face the monitors, where the display showed the vast emptiness of space, now filled with the incoming Zarvok fleet. Dozens of ships, massive and intimidating, were closing in on Station Ilara. The enemy was relentless, and there was no way to avoid the confrontation. "We have one chance," Varnock said. "We must work together. The bond between us, between the humans and the Carathans, is the only way we can survive this." Daniel felt a surge of determination. The bond. It wasn't just something between him and Varnock anymore. It was something that had spread across all the soldiers, human and Carathan alike. They had learned to trust each other, to understand each other in ways they never thought possible. Turning to the gathered officers, Daniel addressed the room. "This is it. The Zarvok will be here soon. We know what we're facing, and we know the stakes. But we also know that we are not alone. We stand united, and we will not let fear tear us apart." A murmur of agreement spread through the room. It was clear that the soldiers, both human and Carathan, had come to the same conclusion. They were in this together. The plan was simple. They would combine the forces of both species, using their strengths in unison. The humans would provide their technological expertise, while the Carathans would bring their immense strength and battle experience. And at the center of it all was the device, the weapon the Cyril had entrusted to them. As the hours passed, Daniel and Varnock worked together, overseeing the final preparations. The station's defensive systems were being enhanced, and the soldiers were getting into position. The tension was palpable, but it was clear that they were ready. Outside, the Zarvuk fleet drew closer. The silence of space was interrupted only by the sound of the station's engines and the distant hum of the enemy ships. Daniel could feel the weight of the moment in the pit of his stomach. This was it. There was no more time for doubts. "We have to make sure the device works," Daniel said, looking at Varnock. "If we don't, all of this is for nothing." Varnock nodded, his eyes unwavering. "It will work. The trust is there. We will succeed." The final countdown began, and the first wave of Zarvuk ships entered the station's range. The alarm systems blared, and the soldiers braced themselves for impact. Daniel could feel the bond between him and Varnock strengthen, and he knew that their combined will was the key to victory. The battle began in a flash. Zarvuk ships unleashed their weapons, sending a storm of energy blasts toward the station. The human ships retaliated, firing their lasers in synchronized patterns, while the Carathan warriors prepared for a ground assault. The station's defenses held, but the enemy was relentless. They wouldn't give up easily. In the chaos, Daniel felt the bond surge again. He reached out mentally, connecting with Varnock, guiding their forces. The Carathan warriors responded with precision, moving in tandem with the human soldiers. The two species fought side by side, covering each other's weaknesses, anticipating each other's moves. It was working. Slowly but surely, they were holding their ground. But the Zarvuk weren't done yet. They launched a second wave, larger and more powerful than the first. The station's shields began to flicker, the strain of battle taking its toll. Daniel's heart raced as he watched the enemy ships closing in. "We can't hold them off forever," he said, his voice tight with tension. Varnock's eyes were fierce, and he gripped his weapon with both hands. "We don't need to hold them off forever. We need to use the device." With a nod, Daniel turned to the control panel. The Cyril's device was ready, but it needed a final activation. It required not just their hands, but their hearts and minds. Humans and Carathans working together, fully trusting in one another. "Now," Daniel shouted. The device activated, glowing with a blinding light. The energy surged through the station, and a pulse of power shot toward the incoming Zarvuk fleet. The energy field enveloped the enemy ships, neutralizing their weapons and disabling their engines. The Zarvuk fleet faltered, their ships falling silent in space. "We did it," Daniel breathed, barely able to believe it. But their victory was short-lived. A Zarvuk flagship, massive and imposing, broke through the energy field, still operational. It loomed ahead, its weapons primed. It was their last test, a final stand. Varnock stepped forward, his voice like thunder. "This is not over yet. Together, we will finish this." The humans and Carathans prepared for one final charge. The future of their species depended on this moment.